there are some, like, I've got a couple of poems that are like, this was a thing in the news this week. It's a fun thing to riff off this.
Yeah.
But in a month's time, this poem is pointless now.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that poem. That poem worked for that week, and in those arenas and spaces, it was great. I've never called a poetry from an arena before. What the hell was
the
that?
arena, the battle dome, the thunderdome that is poetry.
Hello and welcome to the Process Podcast. This is where an intro will go. One day I'll rehearse one. Today, it's not that day. What I will do is bring you wonderful guests, and today's best, I'm going to go for Catherine Blair. We have Catherine Blair.
Oh my God, you full named me.
I know. I mean, do we have middle names to add into that as well, or are we just going to go for this?
I don't think I should be revealing my middle names on the internet. That's how you get your bank details stolen.
Oh yes, in the lower third will say Kath Blair. I will know you as Kath Blair, refer to you as Kath Blair.
Yes.
So I'm always aware whenever I try to tag you in things on Instagram, I keep forgetting that your Instagram name is Urban, but it's, oh yeah, that always catches me off guard.
Yeah, I made my Instagram very long ago, and now I've been published so much with my socials, like in my bio, that I'm like, if I change this, people can't find me for older things. So I'm locked in. I'm like locked into this Instagram name. I'm locked into my Twitter name. When Blue Sky becomes more popular, God willing, I'll be locked into that Blue Sky name. But I did get K Blair for Blue Sky, so it does feel like I'm like, being early on that platform has rewarded me.
Getting early in on that branding and all of that, because it's all about the branding.
Yeah, I mean, you just want people to be able to find you, right? Like, that's the main thing, is like, you want people to seek you out so they can find your work. And my biggest problem is that Tony Blair's daughter is the exact same spelling as me, and she's older and a famous lawyer. So if you Google my full name, you'll never find me, which feels counterproductive to what I'm trying to achieve, which is please find my writing and enjoy it and tell me that you enjoy it.
Well, as I try to do tangents all that, and speaking of finding you, I'm trying to go for, as I start this, the first time I met you. And I have no idea when that would have been. Like,
well, I do.
Like, my thought process is, it's poetry scene, it's an open mic of some kind, I just can't think of which one. So when would the first time have been then? The
first time we met is that Debbie hired you to perform for my...
Oh, God, yes, Goldsmiths.
For my society. So the English Pen Society, which is how I got into the spoken word scene, is through Debbie Luxon and through the English Pen Society at Goldsmiths. But yeah, we hired you to perform, I think, at... I can't remember exact event. I think it might have been our like end of year party type event. And then the following year after that, when I took over the society with my friends Will and Mads, we were like, we should hire people that are cool and would be great and we know can perform. It's like, we have Tyrone's email somewhere. We'll just email Tyrone and ask if he would like to do it. So that's actually like probably when we've had a first like conversation, but we met at the society event, and then Debbie like ushered me into the world of spoken word, and then I just was like around and going to things, and then we actually started talking to each other in terms of like, we have similar interests that are outside of poetry and all of those things.
I always love that kind of challenge of when you go from just seeing each other at events to when do we actually become friends, because there was that gap between seeing each other at events and talking to people at events, and then that's next stage, which is the harder one of going to, can we do something that's not a poetry event?
Yeah, you really want to actually see people in a different setting when they're not performative. Because as much as like poetry is a very like community-based space, you're still like putting on the persona of performer in that space, because that's either what you've been hired to do, or you're just like, I have to get in the zone for my 5 minutes on the open mic so that I present the best version of myself. So you're like, what are you actually like? And also, what are very basic facts about you that are not necessarily things you've spoken about on stage?
That wonderful, awkward thing. And like, there's nothing... I'd say there's nothing inherently wrong with it, but that awkward moment when I know how your mum died, I know your most triggering things, but I can't tell you what your favourite colour is or what you like to do on a Saturday night kind of vibe, which is a weird dynamic.
Yeah, Rebecca Cooney and I had this conversation for the first time at Laurie Eve's birthday party, where Rebecca was like, I've known you for 3 years and I don't know where you live. I was like, yeah, it's very like basic information because you're not necessarily sharing everything on stage. And what you are sharing on stage sometimes is true and sometimes is like, this was a fun writing exercise that I did. So it's not necessarily based on anything real. It's just like, I wanted to explore what this idea means and play around with language. So yeah, that very thing of like, I would like to know more facts about you as a human being. We need to get rid of the poetry space and actually like go to a bar or in our case, play D&D together because it reveals slightly more. And then it's slightly more fun as well when you're just hanging out and it's a very relaxed space because you get to learn what people's real opinions are and what they do enjoy. And also like that also helps foster the community aspect because you're like, this is my genuine friend. Like I care about them and what's going on in their life.
Like there's that wonderful, not mix, but there's that line between, I don't need like your family tree and to know every single one of your brothers, sisters, cousins and whatnot. And as my friends know, I am bad at knowing people's siblings. I forget people have siblings. As an only child myself, I forget to remember, oh yeah, you guys had someone else growing up with you.
Yeah,
That's the thing.
I'm an interesting one where my brother is 15 years older than me. He's from my dad's first marriage and we've not like lived together as siblings. So I occupy a space where I am technically an only child in how I was raised, but also I do have an older brother and he is part of my life and I love him very much and we do spend time together. But again, a 15-year age gap. So like, yeah, it's a weird space where I'm both a younger sibling and also like occupy that space of only child where it's like...
I just forget to even think that, oh yes, siblings exist. It's just never been a thing I've had to worry about. So, oh yeah, and that would probably be a thing to check up and make sure, how is your sibling doing? And I'm bad at that.
I assume he's good.
Yeah.
We have this, my brother will be coming over for Christmas. So that'll be an opportunity where they'll be like, yeah, now let's talk about the passage of time that we've not seen each other for because he lives in Dubai with his wife. So it's like time difference and also trying to... And I don't necessarily talk about him on stage, not because he's not fascinating if he's watching and or listening.
But because it's all about me when it's on stage.
Yeah, 100%. It's like, I don't need to write poems necessarily about my brother, because not that he isn't a fountain of inspiration, but I've not necessarily found the right words for that relationship yet. I feel like there's more space for creative nonfiction essays about that relationship because I feel like I need more words to describe it. Like poetry is all about like cutting down your words, whereas I think an essay or something like more creatively based in a longer format would work better.
Nice. Well, as we're going into the words and essays and all of that, we're going to now go to our section called Timelines. You kind of briefly mentioned it with the whole Goldsmith side of things and sites, but like just in general, like your time as a creative, like when did you? I don't want to say when did you first become a creative, because as has been pointed out to me on this podcast, you kind of people just naturally are creative in the.
Yeah.
So like when did you first start kind of developing the creativeness, showing it, doing more with it? Like how did you kind of like first start properly writing poetry and performing poetry and all that kind of things?
Yeah, I think poetry was always like in the house. So my parents had books that were like comedy poems, the like Pam Ayres and the style of that. That was always around, and I did write a lot. But I think in terms of writing with the intention to be on stage or writing with the intention to be published was, coming to uni, experiencing like local open mics to the university. So stuff that was run in cafes that were close by or run by like student unions, and then branching out to the spoken word scene as it sits in London. I think the biggest sort of moment in that is Natasha Gilbert asking me to be part of London Queer Writers. So we had met because Debbie had hired Kaz Teague and Daisy and Natasha to kind of like come and perform, and like having that conversation and then like reaching out to me through like that summer between my first and second year being like, you're queer and you like to write. Do you want to come to this thing I'm organizing? And I was like, yeah, 100%. That sounds really interesting. And then I started to like go to more things because I knew they existed. and started to perform in that way of like, oh, I can just get up on an open mic and do that. That's a thing I can do. So start going to Spoken Word London, penting a couple of times, and then when London Queer Writers were going to do a night, like helping with that and graduating from. I like started off when we were first doing our night. I was like in charge of the projector, and then I was just when we moved to a space that didn't have a projector and we got rid of that whole segment. Just like timekeeping, and then it graduated to like, oh, we need people to host. I'd like to throw my hat in the ring like for that, and became one of like a few hosts with the idea that like we wouldn't have necessarily a consistent person just to avoid burnout and just to avoid like if somebody's not available, there's always a backup. But got into hosting, which is like one of my favorite things because you get to perform, but also it's like no one's there to see you. It's not about you. So you can be like, you have to listen to me and I'm responsible for everyone having a good time. But also it's just a facilitating role. It's not necessarily like, oh, I've got to think about my very important like 10-minute, 15-minute set and what I'm going to say and how I'm going to get all these things. It's like, I warm up the mic. I like make people feel good. I'm part of the scenery and the furniture in that way, but also like get to be performative. And that was kind of the process. And then obviously lockdown happened and we stopped going to nights, and that's when I started to be more like, okay, there are loads of literary journals out there. There are so many, and people start new ones all the time. Let's like start submitting and like get my like work into places. And so that was like the passage of like the last couple of years have been more like submit. Oh my God, just send it out. It doesn't matter if it gets rejected. The more you send out, the more likely you are to like get stuff published. And I'm really lucky to have been.
That kind of fun phase, but like, I think a good thing about London, obviously, there's so many poetry nights on the scene, and like whether it's just developing your craft or being social, there's so many spaces for that in London. But I think there's also that thing of like, cool, what are you doing next? What now? Kind of thing is definitely a bit of the vibe, and like obviously, as I've mentioned this both on this podcast and just in general, there's definitely a place for people just do this for fun. They don't have to make it a career, so there's nothing wrong with just I like going to open mics. Done. Yeah,
I do this for fun. Like, it is a hobby in the sense that I'm doing it because I enjoy it. And also, I feel like if I didn't write, I'd go insane. Like, I have to do it. It has to come out of me in some way. Like, I have to be doing some form of creativity. Otherwise, like, there's like an itch at the back of my brain that's not being scratched. But I also have a 9-to-5 job. So it's like, I'm not necessarily dedicating myself to being a creative full time. But that doesn't mean I'm not putting the work in and not trying to like cultivate practice and improve and go to things and do stuff. But at the same time, it's like I'm never gonna because like to be an author is to have another job. There's like you can't just make money off of writing.
Right. At best, there's like 1% of authors that can do that, and even then, that's
they're like franchising their stuff, or they're just very lucky, and so much of it is luck. So I work in publishing as my day job. In the sales and marketing side of it, a lot of stuff is luck and is just being at the right space at the right time in terms of like when something sort of becomes a bestseller and when something like really hits. And sometimes it can like a lot of authors can sit on a project and it's been out for a couple of years and then someone else discovers it and it goes viral, and that's when loads of people are buying copies. So like it can be very hit and miss in that way. So for me, it's like, it is a hobby. I'm doing it because I enjoy it. And if I didn't enjoy it, I would stop doing it. But that hasn't happened. I love it. I love it so much.
And I guess it's the thing as well of like, well, this is a hobby, and we level of like, we might as well find out more about it and get into it more. And that it comes into like research and all that kind of stuff. And I guess moving on to the present side of things, then like, where are you with this hobby at the moment?
With this hobby. So I'm currently writing in terms of like I'm always writing, but I'm in kind of a phase where I'm trying to put together an actual like pamphlet collection. I have a microchap that is published, that was published as part of Ghost City Press's summer series. So for like from May to September, they do a whole series where they will, if you sign up via email, they email you a microchap, which is like 9 to 10 poems in ebook form, like just into your inbox for that whole summer. And it was for summer 2022, and mine was Jesus Loves You, God Hasn't Decided Yet. It was like 9 poems that were my very like Catholic like horny, bisexual, all the bits and pieces all together in like one little place, which is available to download for free, and continues after this summer series. But I would quite like to have something that is an actual physical book that people can take away. Because having performed and done a few feature sets, being like, please go to this link and download is very hard, especially like some of the places that poetry nights end up. They might not have great service. So you're like, I need you to go to this link. And you're like, well, the Wi-Fi here is terrible. So there's no guarantee that they'll go and like look at it later. Whereas if you've got a physical book, you can put it like in someone's hands and they feel like they've taken something away. Although PJ at the last process did not have physical copies of his book, but was selling copies of his book, which I found so funny because he effectively had invented NFTs in that space. It's like, you've bought a book, you have technically bought a book, you're not taking it away with you, but you have bought one.
I mean, you're basically doing an I owe you one book.
Yeah, I owe you one book. It'll appear in the post by magic. But yeah, that kind of, I would obviously love to have something in print. Like, who doesn't want to have something in print? Not everyone, obviously, but for me, that's important to like see my name. And having been published in a few like short story anthologies and a few like poetry anthologies, there's just something very like special to me as somebody who is a writer and loves books and works in books, and just like that whole thing of like, this is a physical thing and that's my name, and it would be nice to have that.
Wait, I mean, it's always that thing of like, I don't want to talk down on the audiences or people that come to watch poetry, etc. But there is definitely a little bit of that vibe of the more steps they have to go through, the less likely they are to do a thing. As someone myself, this level of like, oh, you asked me to do this and then download this and do it. Like, that's effort sometimes. If you can get just the first step of, here is the thing straight away, people are more likely inclined to, I get that vibe for that. Yeah,
and as much as people enjoy ebooks, and ebooks have like a great value as a service, it is harder to like, people like the physical books. Like, every year somebody is like, print is dead, and it's like, well, no, because bookshops still exist. Like, we love physical books. Like, I think people just like having the thing in their hands, and they're like, go to this place where you can download this thing is, not as exciting as like, oh, I can just read this on the train home. Like, if I'm on the underground, which has no Wi-Fi. I don't have to worry about if I've got signal. I don't have to worry if I've actually already downloaded it in advance. I've physically got it here. I know I've got it. Yeah, and like having it signed by the author as well feels really special. Like, having friends at this point who have been published a lot, it's like, okay, I like having my copy of your book that has your little message to me in it. That feels really like special.
I mean, there's also just in general, and as a media head, that whole vibe of like, you look at some of the streaming platforms, and for all the quote good that streaming has done, it has made things differently accessible, less reliant on cable and all kind of stuff. It's also put things in the hands of these corporations that can go, we're going to pull this TV show, and so you're going to have like access to it again, and like that certainty of a book of, I physically have this. You can't take it away from me because I will always have it. Yeah, and as much as like books go out of print, like there are things that go out of print, or the rights are returned to the author and that particular publisher no longer publishes them. But at the end of the day, I think there's like, there is that thing of streaming services will hold onto their rights and just hoard them in their vault, whereas publishers, as a duty to the author, are like, we couldn't make this sell. That's just what the market is like. We will return the rights to you. You can now do whatever you want with them. So they can either choose to self-publish, or they can take them to another publisher and like utilize them however they want. Or they'll go, if the author's died, they go back to the estate. Like, there's this understanding that the publisher doesn't hoard IP forever. It always goes back to the author in that way. And then with that also then going from the fan perspective, that thing of like, well, I've already got the things, I'm not going to lose it now. Whereas like, the amount of TV shows that I watched at a time when I enjoyed it, and like, oh, it's 5 years later, I'd love to watch it again, and it's not available to me. Yeah. Whereas like a book, it's like, cool, I can read the book or leave it on a shelf for later, and I can come back to it, and that certainty of it's always here. Yeah, and I think especially with poetry, like, it's not a novel, you're not supposed to read every page in order. The idea is that you would read a little bit and then you can put it down and come back to it, and like theoretically have like a poem a day for a week and like go through it in a very different way. It's designed to be dipped in and out of.
As much as like the poems are in order in the same way an album is in order, it is also designed that you can kind of dip in and out when how you feel like it and what you need in that moment. It's like, oh, I want to read this poem. Okay, I want something that feels like that is on this theme, or I just need something a little bit creative to like start my day with. It's more designed to kind of be chewed over for longer because it's like you can drag it out more.
Well, obviously, you kind of mentioned briefly about that you wanting the whole physical things, like looking at the future, like what is your future like, especially given this a hobby? Is it just a level of nice to have a book out, or are there more grander plans for what you'd want to do going forward as well?
Yeah, like it is a hobby in the sense that it is like, this is for fun. I'm not necessarily looking to be on bestseller lists or like this is my career as a writer. But I think like that doesn't mean I don't want to try and write longer pieces. That doesn't mean I don't want to try and get stuff out in the world. There is, as much as self-publishing I think is really valuable and is a way of like taking back control from publishing monopolies, having worked within publishing, I know also the value of having a team behind you to help you sell your book. Like, I don't have the energy to self-market in that way. I don't want to be self-marketing in that way. So having like somebody who is hired to be the editor of your book and somebody who like is responsible for sales and is responsible for all of those things just like helps streamline that. So there is a comfort that comes with like an official process, an official way of going through like the publishing system that I would like to access in some way, however that ends up being where I like submit my work to. And I think at the moment I'm like compiling poems that feel in conversation with each other to build a pamphlet. So I've been kind of in this so like my Catholic poems were a lot of my sort of early years of writing because that was what felt most relevant to me when I was starting to like perform, because that I'd just come out of Catholic school to go in, like, even though it was slightly removed through A-levels, it was like that trauma and that like residual energy of like, this has affected how I view the world because it was such a part of my life for so long, were what I was writing about. And now that I'm kind of out of that, and that's not to say like fully over it, but like not interested in writing about it because I feel like I've done it to death. I've been moving more towards like the exploration of my gender through media, like specifically horror media more often than not, but also through like, I'm a really big cinema fan. So it's been more of how does like the cult classic, the idea of cinema, like in terms of how I present with my gender identity and what that means, and also what do I find interesting about cinema as a craft. So it's kind of been that thing. I've been building lots of like, putting lots of poems together, learning lots of things about how cinema is made, like the choices that are like made to make a film. I love film trivia, like the stuff about how something came to be is really fascinating to me. And I like sort of behind the scenes stories of like, this is how we got this shot. This is the choices we made for this costume and why those things come together in a way that, yeah, film as art has become more important to me as I've like moved through my writing and as I've gotten older.
Well, with all of this, like obviously so much of it's on the book and like longer form story things. Is there anything in the future of like performance wise, or is it all tied together, or where does the performance side of things lie for you?
I just always feel very lucky when anybody asks me to do a feature set. Like, I think that I do know how to perform and I do have a really great stage presence. There's like two very distinct moments of my like performance career that I remember. One was I was part of Spoken Word London's anti-hate anthology, and I got 2 poems into that anthology, one in faith and one in sexuality. And they, during their book launch, I'd like gone to the bathroom and Hannah Gordon told me that Pat had said, look how she captures the room, when I'd like gotten on stage and performed my work. So I'd always hold that compliment like very dear to me. And the second, which is slightly more recent, is that I was performing at Process and I was sat on a table of people I've seen a little bit, but like had not interacted with too much. And after that performance, Isolde was like I kind of remembered your face, but I didn't know until you got on stage. And the moment you started performing, I knew exactly who you were. We don't have a feature for Sweet Sundays. Would you come and be the feature? And I was like, I would be so honored. Because to me, I love performing, but I don't necessarily seek it out in the way. Like, I'm never going to ask to perform at anybody's night necessarily. Because it's like, I'm not trying to make this as a career. So in my mind, I'm always like, the people who are deserve to like be booked front and center. And if you also want me to be there and to perform, that's amazing. And I'm so honored and so grateful that you asked. So like, if people want me to come and do things, I'm always open to it. I love doing it, but I'm not necessarily somebody who's like actively seeking it out of like, how many nights can I perform at? How many like open mics can I be on to get that spot? It's not the way that I work. I just enjoy doing it, and to be part of it and to be part of the night is wonderful and exciting, but it's not necessarily my goal in the same way as for some spoken word artists it is.
No, I feel like the slightly less, not competitive, but the less competitive version of the way I've been doing stuff in that I don't ask for features much, if at all. I wait to what people give me. A little bit of that as level of I've got this far, let's see how far I can keep pushing it. And see the thing like, oh, people do keep offering me gigs. Well, let's see if I can get these bigger gigs, and kind of subtly dropping hints of like, oh, look, I am available on this day. Just without specifically asking. But no, it is that thing as well of like, I don't need this to be a full-time career. Yeah. So I'm not, again, if you ask me, I will probably say yes. Yeah. But I don't need it. I can also happily have, I mean, admittedly, I do like the nice little, this little bit of extra spending money here for this month. Yeah, I mean, a bit of a vibe. I mean, I'm not mad about it. Like, I'm not mad about the extra, like, a little bit extra, because I'm both a bit of a clothes horse, and also I like treats. So to have a little bit extra spending money is not a bad thing, because I took treat yourself to heart, and I shouldn't have done. Like, I need to learn how to budget. I mean, hello, look at Tyrone's setup. He took treat himself very much to heart and bought way too much shit. Well, you know, I want to look good on the open mic if I ever ever on. So I am an outfit repeater. You'll see me in multiple outfits. It's just like restyled, but. Yeah, I love to be asked, and like I love to be in spaces where people are like excited having seen you on an open mic, and that sort of complimentary nature in that way. But I don't necessarily feel like I need to be gigging all the time, and like, or trying to ascertain like there's no ideal gig for me, because like the joy is just being like getting my little 15 minutes, and then like also seeing how other people run their nights, and being like, okay, I've been here, I'll like come back here because I really liked the vibe here, and you've like created a nice setup. And I think also it is an element of like being social for me. As much as like I love spending time with lots of like varieties of friends, there is a social element of me of like, this gets you out of the house and gets you doing stuff. Like the goal is to just be in the space and to enjoy being in the space. I think I perform more than I used to, because when I was first starting out, it's also like when you're first starting out, you're not very good, because you have to write like millions of bad poems to write a good one. So I was aware of my own limitations of like, I've written some interesting stuff. Not all of it's great. I don't necessarily want to be performing my like 2 good poems over and over again. But to sit in this space and to listen to people who are amazing and learn from them is such a valuable like time. It's valuable to just sit in that space and not perform, just sit and be part of the atmosphere. And I've heard some really interesting things. I've heard some okay things. I've heard some things that like made me think differently about a subject that I thought was very cliche. I'm going to go talk to that poet maybe and be like, I thought your stuff was really good. Like, let's have a chat. Like, that social aspect is, I would argue, like more important to me than performing. Nice. Well, on that lovely notion, we'll end our timeline section there, as we now move on to the wonderful section known as Let's Talk About. Now, moving into our Let's Talk About section, where we're going to start off talking about collections, and hell, we might even move into collectives and all that fun. See, words. Yeah, you've married them together. But yes, talking about collectors. So obviously in that last section, we were talking about the idea of putting out a collection this year. So I guess first, your experience with putting out the chapter. So how has that been so far? Like putting your work out as a thing, even if it's just a small little thing, but how has that been so far? It's been so
great. Like, there are so many amazing literary journals. There are so many amazing poets around the world. And that's what I love about the internet, is that you can talk to people from loads of different like walks of life who are also writing and whose work like resonates with you and your work resonates with them. I have so many like friends that I've like made through the internet where it's like, okay, you're like a poet based in Ohio and I've never met you, but I'm going to buy your collection because you published me in this particular literary journal and I like your work, which is why I submitted to that open call in the first place. So yeah, it's been really rewarding. And like a lot of things, like I've had a lot of rejection. So in the past like month, the 4 pieces that I had that were like out in the world to be for submission were all rejected. So it's not like, oh my God, I'm getting everything all the time. It's like a nice sort of balance. And yeah, submitting to places that are sort of slightly like so indie as to be like, we're just publishing about this very specific thing, or we're like cultivating a certain vibe or energy. Like one of my favorite journals to submit to, which is the most stressful because the way that they do their submission calls is they like decide based on whims. So you have to be like so quick, and they cap it at like 150 submissions. So if you're not there on the like minute, the journal's called Had. If you're not there and you don't get it in that like 1 second that like everyone else is logged on, you might not get in. And there's been a couple of times where I've like missed it. But I love submitting to them because it's that joy of like, oh my God, it's only open for this amount of time and it's this specific thing. And I've had like they call, if you get your like stuff published with them, they call it getting a skull. I've got 2 skulls, so I'm like working on getting that third. But yeah, there's been other really interesting journals. So I'm part of Unthinkable, a Gothic anthology, which is a collection of short stories which are like queer, like Gothic short stories that are sort of like horror and Gothic adjacent. So mine was like a reimagining of the Bloody Mary myth. And that was really fun to be like, oh, I'm part of this really cool like collection of people, like collection of writers. It's a thing you can buy in a bookstore. Like you can go and like and all these things. So that's been really interesting. And that was also like an editorial process. Like when you submit to a literary journal, your poem's usually finished, whereas this was more of a like, hey, there will be feedback. It'll be a back and forth. You have to like
what you've got here. We can work with this.
Yeah, we're going to make this better. We're going to like, there was one line they were like, is this necessary? And I was like, well, I'm the poet and it has to be in there. That's why I wrote that line.
Kill your darlings, kill your darlings.
Yeah, there is an element of kill your darlings. There's things I'm like grammar and like things that make the sentence better. I'm willing to like immediately be like, you're the editor and you know what you're talking about 100%. But like, if it's a poetic line that means nothing but is beautiful, that has to stay because I wrote that to be beautiful.
There was a fun balance to that whole editing thing because again, I think you mentioned beforehand in poetry that so much of poetry is cutting it down to the most necessary things on some level. But there's also a level of this is a creative thing and I'm just being creative here, and there's that fun balance between the two. I've said it on the podcast before, I've said it to other people in real life before. One of my favourite moments was when I was editing, when I was giving Kayla some feedback on her manuscript. There was one poem that I literally was like, it was like a 2-page poem. I went, the 3 lines at the start say the whole poem. Yeah. The rest of it is not needed. Cut it down to just these 3 lines. And Kayla was rightly annoyed at me at first.
Yeah, it is hard to get feedback. Not because it feels personal. Yeah. And it's not necessarily that person's not right. It's just that like poetry, I think, in a way that maybe other writing is usually so personal, even if you're not talking about personal subjects. So you end up being like, well, what would you know anyway? And then you come back to it and you're like, yeah, actually, you were correct. That was the right judgment call in this moment.
It's also that thing, it is very subjective in that this one person will say no to that, but this other person's like, that's my favourite line in the whole poem. And that's the thing that makes sense. Like, different people will have different things. Like, I think one of my favourite people to give work with feedback-wise back in the day was Maddie Godfrey, because our ways of writing are very different. So a lot of the time they would give me like feedback on a line or whatever, things that they don't work for them. And I'm like, no, but it works for me in this way. And I kind of defended my line and kind of made me aware that the lines I was fighting back on is like, okay, I like those lines. Whereas there are a couple of lines where like, no, you got a point and kind of made it clear, like, oh, these ones yes, those ones no, and it was nice to figure out in that kind of a way.
It's like learning what you really value about what you've written and what is the like key integral part of your writing style. Because I feel a lot of times with poets, like developing a writing style can be very difficult because you have so much in the world that's influencing you in terms of how poetry is written. So to have an editor and to have feedback in that way is so valuable, to be like, actually, this is what feels like is genuinely me when I'm writing, versus like, actually, this makes this poem bad and this makes this poem clunky and not flowing in the way, or not like necessarily like giving the idea that across that I want to have.
To like going forward for you, like moving and adjusting, Tyrone, but going forward for you, like what are the kind of the challenges at the moment as you kind of start to put together pamphlet or collection kind of thing? Like what are the things we're dealing with most? Sure, phrasing.
I think my big issue at the moment is that I'm writing a lot of new stuff to kind of build stuff together, like taking things I've already written, putting stuff together that feels like it works as like, not necessarily that there's a narrative, but they feel in conversation with each other. I think the biggest thing about writing new stuff is this a poem or is this a comment? Like, do I have something to say here, or is this just something I've noticed and I'm trying to make it bigger than it is? Because loads of poems are like, I've noticed this one thing, I'm going to build a whole poem around this concept. But I think that sometimes you can write something and you're like, I just needed to get that off my chest. I don't know if it's valuable beyond me doing the exercise of writing. So I wrote something recently, which I have performed because I kind of wanted to see whether it was worth like existing in the world in that way. But the tube is really loud. Like the tube is so loud and has been recorded as 110 decibels on the central line. And you're not supposed to be in an area of that like level of loud noise for an extended period of time. An average rock concert is 85. So there's this thing of like moving back to London and realizing how loud the tube was. And then there's a very popular brand of headphones called loop headphones, earplugs even, where you like put them in and they're supposed to help dampen noise, but they cost like a reasonable amount for the money. You know, you're buying a good product, but like there was something about it that was like, the cost of these like earplugs are the same as like 4 or 5 books, and I would rather have 4 or 5 books. But also I would like to preserve my hearing. So in writing this thing, it was like trying to be a bit funny, trying to be a bit like talking about music and talking about like, there were some interesting lines in it. So I had the line that's like, you know, they should invent a high volume that doesn't have permanent consequences. And I thought that was like, oh, I like that. That's fun. But I don't like, having performed it out loud and not necessarily got the like laughter reaction I was looking for. I think it's like, okay, this gets to be tabled. I'll maybe butcher that later to like take things out that I find interesting, but it's not necessarily like working with what I want this pamphlet to be. And it's not like funny enough yet to be like performed on stage. So it needs work. But that's, I mean, guess the joy of like performing in open mics is you can test stuff out in the same way that comedians test stuff out. You're like, I want a ideal audience reaction. They're not responding in the way that I would hope. Therefore, I think this needs work.
I mean, it's one of the whole things with art in general, that idea of like, and like, there's nothing wrong with it, but that idea of some things work in a moment, some things work long term. And like, there are some, like, I've got a couple of poems that are like, this was a thing in the news this week. It's a fun thing to riff off this.
Yeah.
But in a month's time, this poem is pointless now.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that poem. That poem worked for that week, and in those arenas and spaces, it was great. I've never called a poetry from an arena before. What the hell was
the
that?
Arena. The Battle Dome, the Thunderdome that is poetry.
Yeah. But like in those spaces, like it works for this time being, and it's in people's minds. It's cool. But then you go a month later and like, what Liam Neeson news are you talking about, kind of thing?
Yeah, there are things that are like, this worked because everyone was feeling it at that moment, like, and there is the phenomenon of it, but will it last? And it's not even just that will it last, it's like, is it worth talking about in the first place? Because I think the joy of open mics is like kind of like theatre, it exists for that moment, and that production will never be like done again. It exists for that one space. And that's a really fun part of like performing in spoken word is like it exists in that moment in that room, and there is no evidence of it except when Tyrone takes loads of photos and videos of you. But there is no evidence except in all of us here in this space. So if like that poem that you wrote that's really bad or just doesn't work in the way you wanted, it's like, well, I never have to perform or put that to print ever again. And that's fine. That existed for that second, and like it was worth the effort it took to create it for that moment of its existence. But yeah, it can be kind of like putting together stuff that works together rather than just here are some poems I've written in a year. Like they're all about lots of different topics, which has value in itself. Like a lot of older poets from like, you'll have a year's worth of their work because they have like, that's what everything they wrote in that year, and they have the like literary clout to be able to do that. But I think for like chapbooks and pamphlets, and what it seems like is that they want these poems to like have a flow to them.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily that they're all on the same subject or that they're all like centered around an idea, but there is a sense of like you're guiding your reader through an experience or through a kind of narrative journey, in that it's like, okay, here's what this person's been thinking about, here's what's influencing them, here's like, there's no necessarily like resolution because it's not a novel, there doesn't need to be one, but it's like we're building to something, and then this last poem on the page is like, this is what I'm leaving you with.
Well, yeah, the idea of like, is the thing you're putting out your greatest hit, or is it a collection kind of vibes? But I guess looking at kind of putting stuff out, obviously you mentioned before, like some of the more niche publishers and things you're going to, like, how is it for you, especially with some of the topics you talk about in your poetry, seeing like putting the collection together, and like how much of that is thinking out, is it going to be for a mainstream, or I think mainstream is a strong word in poetry, but like that level of like, how much is it of like, oh, this stuff works, this niche audience, like, do I just cater to them? Do I try to cater outside? That line in between and all that, like how much of that is a consideration, I guess, when putting things out into the world?
Putting things out into the world. I never consider a mainstream audience in whatever that means for poetry. So if I had a book published, if I was lucky enough to have a collection published and it's available in a Waterstones or a Blackwell's or what have you, like my ideal person picking that up is that they need those poems at that exact moment in their life. And it's like, if that happens to be like 5 to 50 people total, like the more important thing is that it resonates with the people who need it, and not necessarily that it has broad appeal. Like I'm never going to have broad appeal. The things I write about are so specific. Whether that's like the specifics of the horror that I'm choosing. So I have a poem about the 1985 film Reanimator, specifically the sequel, Bride of Reanimator, which is from 1990, but it feels spiritually like an 80s movie, wherein like it's like a poem exploring gender, and it's a poem like, because like the concept of Bride of Reanimator is like building a woman out of body parts. That poem like does resonate with people. I've performed it, and people who don't know Reanimator have like enjoyed the words that the poem makes up. But it's also like for that Reanimator fan who's also feeling the same thing and has come to that piece of media with like the same ideas or like similar things. So I'm never necessarily writing for like broad appeal, because I can't. Like I'm interested in very specific things. I'm interested in how like certain ideas come together. A few things that I've been writing about are definitely things that people are thinking about. So I wrote a sestina recently called The Death of the Cult Classic, and the idea that like films currently do not have the ability to become cult classics anymore, because either they like are deleted off of streaming services, or they don't even make it to being a film. So as of like the time of recording, Warner Brothers has decided that they are not going to have Coyote versus Acme like distributed anywhere, even though it's a fully finished film. They have locked it away. They've decided to do the tax write-off. So that feels very relevant at the moment. And that poem is kind of about that relevance. So there's definitely like things that lots of people are talking about. And because I follow a few like film journalists and I'm interested in film criticism, they're all talking about these different things. That poem is not specifically about that decision. It's much broader in its scope. But like there are definitely like mainstream ideas that I'm thinking about, but I'm not necessarily writing for a mainstream audience when constructing the poem. And you can't have broad appeal generally because like the concept of having broad appeal, like it doesn't work because there are going to be people who just don't get it because it's not for them, and art shouldn't necessarily always be for everybody.
Yeah.
Like I'm very much a person who believes that like all art should be accessible in that you should be able to access it. There should be no bars preventing you from like accessing poetry or film or museums or whatever. You should be able to access art, but you should also recognize that sometimes it's not made with you in mind. It's made for a very specific audience, or it's made to capture a like cultural idea that you are not a part of, and that's totally fine. It doesn't mean that the art can't resonate with you or that you can't find sort of common ground within it, but there are just things that are never going to be for everybody, and that's better. Like when art is made with that intentionality of like, this is who I'm speaking to. Other people can enjoy this, but I made this for this specific group of people. It like, I feel like it lasts longer. It has that kind of like, it lacks the blandness or the sanded off edges that come with things that are made to like, we just got to hit the like idea of a broad audience, which to be honest is usually like white, cisgender, like heterosexual.
Yeah, and like, it's that idea as well of like, there's obviously a place for art that is a level of the, again, not accessible, like for as open as it can to tick in as many boxes as it can. There's a nice thing for that every now and then, but not every art has to be that. There are some arts like, oh, this is for this niche here, this niche here.
Yeah.
You're welcome to come into it, but a level of we've written it for this specifically.
Yeah,
for that.
like the joy of like an open mic is you usually get people who are trying to write for a specific audience. And there'll be like poets of color who want to speak on things that come from their cultural background in like a depth and a beauty that I don't necessarily like understand, in the sense of like, it's not for me because I'm not part of that culture. And that's not a bad thing. That just makes me interested and excited to learn and excited to hear about what that particular poet loves about their culture. And it becomes interesting in that way, but it's not necessarily written with me in mind. And that's good. It should be like that.
And there's also just a skill in general of like so many people, like they might talk about this specific thing, like without being too vain about myself, but there is a level of, cool, I'm using these specific film references and TV references that if you know it, you get so much more from it. But there's still stuff to get if you don't know the specific references. And I think it's the idea of like, just because you're not queer doesn't mean you're not going to understand this queer poem.
Yes.
Queer people will get more from it, but you, non-queer person not as familiar with it, you'll get something different from it, or be a level of like, oh, I didn't realize that you experienced that or felt that, and now I can...
Yeah, and I think it's not necessarily the goal of art, but I think it is important for art to open you up to new ways of being that you previously were unaware of. And that the goal is to kind of, I think it's Fran Lebowitz who says that art should be a door and not a mirror. Like it shouldn't reflect your own experience back at you. It should open you up to a brand new one, and you should want to go through that door. And that is kind of the idea, is like, we're all very like, poetry is very self-indulgent because it's very like personal in that way. But I think through that self-indulgence, like I'll reward people who are self-indulgent in the way of like, you're writing things that you enjoy writing. It's for you to a certain extent. And if other people like it, that's amazing. But it's like, yeah, finding that point of connection where it's like, I've written this thing and it spoke to this person here, or it spoke to that person like halfway across the world who like also has a similar experience. Yeah, that thing with like writing those specific Catholic poems, especially like coming at it from like a queer angle, is that I had like people who had downloaded that or had just seen it through Twitter reach out to me and be like, I feel like this was written for me. I feel like it resonates with me. I feel like I've like unlocked something here, and it's so important to me to have this like tiny collection of poems. And like, that's the goal in a sense. Like, that's who I'm writing for. That person who like wants to reach out and be like, this experience had not been articulated for me before, and now it has. And I feel like I have something to hold on to in that way.
Nice. And like obviously as someone who's familiar with the publishing world, then like looking at where your potential collection lies, like what are you looking for in publishers? What kind of thing the publishers do that speaks to you, that works with you, or things like, okay, that would be just your views and looking at the publishers and what you'd be looking for.
I think I want somebody who's willing to meet me halfway in terms of like why I've chosen certain subject matters and why some things might not resonate with a mainstream audience. So I recently wrote a poem about Greg Araki's The Living End, which is a very like cult film in terms of like it has a broad enough audience that he has spoken about it at length and stuff, but I feel like it's a very American film. It's very like buried. It was a student film that he made because at that time he was like studying film and had access to the equipment. And it's like, no one got paid on this film. Like they made it for the joy of making it. And so I wrote a poem that was like inspired by it. So I would need like that publisher to fully understand that like, this is so niche. It has to stay as it is. Like I want it to be niche. I want it to not like those people who've watched The Living End or who are interested, like with this like collection that I'm trying to put together at the moment, because it's so cinema influenced, I would love to have a page at the back that's like, here's everything I watched, go ahead and all those bits and pieces, like here's the accompaniment that goes with it. Like
having a proper glossary in a book is a flex and a half, and I love the idea of that.
Yeah, and even it's just like it's a film list, or like I've definitely seen some poetry collections that have this is all the music I was listening to while writing. Like I think there's something to be said of like, here's how we marry art forms together, like because art doesn't exist in a vacuum. So here's what I was influenced by. Here's like why I'm referencing this specific thing. I think obviously like you have a load of poems that have cinema as like the joy and love of cinema as part of them. Like having that thing of like, okay, this is how I pay homage to an art form that is influenced, and we live in the big art form together. But yeah, and having worked in ebooks for a while, knowing that like I would love to, ebooks are so difficult for poetry because you have this problem of like, how do we get the poem to stay as it is, because line breaks and space are intentional in a way that is easy to put on a page but very difficult to translate over into HTML coding for an ebook, especially with the like the stuff that is available, like e-readers that are available. What works on Apple does not necessarily work on Kindle. And that's why when people create ebooks, they have to like test them out on these services first to make sure that they work. And poetry is one of the harder things to make sure it works because like the code can break your poem. So it would be having that knowledge. And I think I would like to go in with a publisher being like, I already have this knowledge because I worked in this. Let's work together to see what the best solution is. Because ultimately, like your publisher will bow to you in terms of like, with the ebook and with the publication, they'll always be like, we want it to be author choice. How do we get that like to make you the happiest that you are with the finished product? But I think that like, yeah, the intentionality of an ebook has become more important to me, having worked on poetry books as ebooks through my job with Penguin. So yeah, that understanding. So like, I think being in publishing, I think there's that thing of like, I'm going to bow to you in all other areas because you know this area of publishing better than me, but I do have some knowledge. So let's work together because I would really like to offer any advice that I have about ebooks in particular, having learned all these skills and then moved like back into sales where it's like, I have all this knowledge that needs to go somewhere now because I'm never going to forget it because it was all really useful. So yeah, I think just somebody willing to work with me, somebody who's like interested in like how I put together work and interested in that nicheness. And also like cover design is actually really important. So I want my cover to look great. Like I'm really invested in that as a process. For my chapbook, it was like my micro chap, it was like, okay, we get to design the covers ourselves. That's great. What am I going to put on the front of this? The only image that I have that I know can't be necessarily like copyright struck is an image of my own body. So it is my body on the front. It's my dad's actually like rosary that he got at his confirmation, and we framed it all up really nice. The light was gorgeous. I like put the text on. It looks amazing. But having done that, like being involved in that process is really important to me. And a good publisher will like involve their author in that process. Like there is no, whilst they know market trends and they're willing to like present a certain idea or they know what's going to look good on something, like authors usually do get like final say because it is important that like you like the cover of your book. But yeah, so someone who's like willing to work with me in that way, willing to like, yeah, accept the nicheness that is going to come from some of these poems, because I have been watching very like, not, yeah, like cult classics in the truest sense of like, no one liked this film when it came out, and then it built an audience, and that audience is very devoted to it because they've like been able to see new things or come at it in a different way that like critics at the time were not able to. Like horror especially, most like if it's from a certain time period, it will have a Roger Ebert like criticism, and he just could not meet horror where it was at. Like science fiction or other types of genre films, he was so willing to like be, hey, this is like trying to do something. But with horror, he was like, it's all disgusting, it's all gross, it doesn't deserve to be made.
I don't see where anyone likes this at all.
Yeah. So like, I think, and I just like looking through a catalogue of like older things and coming at it with like a queer or a trans perspective has been really interesting to be like, okay, so I feel this way about my gender identity and this way about my non-binariness. This character and the way that they've decided to present themselves and the choices that are made are really interesting to me in that way, and I really, really resonates with me. So how do I like pull that apart to pull art out of it? And I think you can just like, as much as like it's interesting to write about my sexuality as someone who's bisexual, I felt like I got like there's a limit on it. Whereas my gender is constantly changing. It is such a like fluid thing. It never stays in one place. Yeah. That is such like, it's so much more interesting to explore, because at the end of the day, I am just going to be like, well, I'm bi. So I find like lots of different types of people attractive. And that's kind of the be all end all. Like it didn't have the same, like I'm not plunging the depths in the same way. Like I feel like there's so many things that I've not uncovered about myself. And also like I'm in my mid-20s, like I have so much, like there's so much more to go, as like, because age also has like an effect on gender presentation. Like when I get my first grey hair, how is that going to feel? What is that going to look like when I like start to incorporate like different aspects of aging into how I style myself and how I like present to the world? So yeah, it can only get better and more interesting and like a more like beautiful vein to like explore.
I guess with that, then I guess it kind of links into as well the kind of collective idea as well of like, you've obviously got, so we always were part of London Queer Rights, and that thing of like, here is a thing that could like connects us.
Yes.
We're all individuals within that, and like it's just something with collection, that thing of like, cool, queerness might run through the whole book, but the book's not going to be about I'm queer.
Yeah, it's so obvious about me.
Like it's more than just like, again, using my book's level of cool. Yeah, talking about blackness, but not there's so many different aspects and points of blackness, and I think that's where the niches come in, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's the just sort of, that's the connecting thing of like, we're writing about things that are unavoidable about us. Like we can't get away from the fact that we are queer and black, but there's so much more that's interesting about it to our own personal experience, but also like how it influences the way that you interact with things. And yeah, I want to, like, I want people to know I'm queer, because God forbid anyone thought I was straight. But yeah, it's that thing of like, I want, like, it's queer art because I'm queer. However, let's go further than that. Like, is it interesting? Is it useful to the people that it's like going to resonate with? Is it like valuable as a piece of art? Sometimes just because it's queer does not make it good. And we've had that conversation where like we've watched stuff or we've engaged with stuff that like is supposed to be reflective of a certain experience, and you're like, well, it was boring though. Like it was just not good. I think it's like, I like growing up in the era of queerbait, at least like queerbaiting to a certain extent, there was like, you could interpret things in lots of different ways, and the sort of relationships that were explored were like, okay, well, this is interesting and fascinating, and I can go at it a lot of different ways. with some of these are confirmed gay characters, they're in a gay relationship, there's like a sanitization, or they've sanded the edges down to make them marketable, and there's like a loss of like depth that I found. I took this off the internet because I saw it in a tweet, but like gay boring, where you're like lured into watching a thing because it has gay people in it, but it's actually not very good.
There's that whole idea of like, yeah, like again, like we're saying, they level like queer does not make it inherently good, and like representation in of itself is not the be all and end all. Like, cool, you've included a black person, a queer person, a non-binary, a trans person, etc. But you've given them no other character traits, no other storylines, nothing to do. They just happen to be queer, black. And like there was some of that is ever so slightly nice in that thing of like, if we've got a character here, and this character can be anything.
Yes.
Therefore, we're not going to default to white straight male. It can be anything. So part of that is good. That being said, can still criticize it for being a bad character.
Yeah.
Like representation is like, cool, I'm not going to like little tiny one pat on the back for we've not gone white cis male, but it's still bad though.
And I think there is a certain like trend, at least with queer media, the more modern queer media, is that the default is white cis men, because there's a marketability to gay men that there isn't with like lesbian relationships. That's not to say there aren't like shows or stuff out there that have lesbian relationships, but they're usually not as popular. And there is also a kind of I think a fear of like queerness in terms of like it being very like, it's always a very sanitized narrative. It's always like if there is horniness in it, it's not necessarily reflective of how like queer people interact with like sex as a thing. It feels kind of divorced from like the ways in which like lots of different relationships can come together.
Well, yeah, like one of the most mainstream ones obviously was Orange is the New Black, and that kind of, and like I think there's a lot of good about Orange is the New Black, but so much of that was a whole prison, and these are not good people, but it changes how it's viewed versus just the level of these are just regular people doing this stuff. Like there was almost something about Orange is the New Black where, well, all you've got is women around you, therefore, of course, that's going to make you queer or whatever. And it's like, these people can be queer just regardless.
Yeah, I think Orange is the New Black suffered from having a very white, like, writer's room.
Yeah.
Which I think affected how, like queer characters of color were written. And I think a lot of, like, I think that people can find different veins in older media that's like this sort of, they've like, we couldn't say this, so we've gone in a different direction, or we've been like, Pedro Almodovar has been making queer films his entire career. So there's like, oh, this is a genuine, like some of the more indie versions, it's like, okay, well, this is just genuinely like queer people that were just around because they were the director's mates, and then they look queerer because they're like, that's somebody living an authentic experience. Whereas some of the more like mainstream queer stuff where it's like there's a sort of assimilation thing of like they've just become part of the establishment, or they've become part of this. There's like a horrible trend of like, well, we've made this butch lesbian a cop, and it's like, oh, gross, I don't want that. And other sort of things where it's like, I just like, queerness is interesting and there's so many ways to explore it, but I want it to be as raw and as gross and as genuine as it can possibly be within my own work. I don't want it to be like polished and presentable. And I think it's also like, as somebody who comes off as femme presenting, or it's like it's the same way I want women to be presented, where it's like, we are hairy beasts, like we like do all the things that a normal natural human body does, and that's just what, like, there is like almost, I think it's a Hollywood problem generally. There's just like a weird removal of like, everybody is so beautiful, but they're so like polished, and there's nothing there that's like a genuine, like how people, like a normal person looks. And even just like how body hair has changed from like the 70s where all men were hairy, and now you watch a modern film and it's like every man has his chest waxed. No man has back hair unless he's a much older actor that's like been working for longer. Like the idea of like the mainstream narratives kind of stripping away like humanity and things that make us very human, in this, whether that's body hair or sweat or like all these different things, to kind of present a very like packaged version. And I don't want the packaged version of queerness in the same way that like you probably don't want the packaged version of blackness. It's like I don't want the marketable version. I want the genuine version that like allows me and other people to kind of like feel natural and feel in that space and not have to like conform to an idea of what it should be. And
I think there's definitely a market, and again, as kind of the, I guess, more niche publishers are kind of proven, there is a market for that. Like, cool, it might not, again, this is the good of the world we live in, as much as it's a very capitalist world and we hate all that sort of it, a level of we're in a world where there is probably a market for things. So like, that balance of I might not get a million, like I know it's not a million, but like I might not get a million people engaging with what I do, but I'll get 1,000 dedicated people all the time.
Exactly.
And the difference between 1 million fair of people who will go away next time or 1,000 people who will be there all the time kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's where the authenticity kind of rewards itself.
Yeah. And the thing is, I don't want to be 3-star media in that way. Like, appealing to the broadest market usually means that it's the blandest thing, because you're trying not to like be different or be a little bit like edgy in that space. It's like I don't want to necessarily have work that is just meh. Like I want it obviously to be good, but like I would rather have something that's just like that is really good than just mediocre. Like even a bad film, like, and I mean bad as in like it's terrible, can have redeeming qualities if everybody was working really hard to make art. A mediocre film is unredeemable, where it's like there's no love here. There's nothing like, it was made to just be a cash grab, or it's just made because like it's not just made with anything of value in terms of like artistic intention. Like I would rather be like, at least with bad art, that like somebody poured their heart and soul in, you can at least see somebody trying, and that to me is more important. And like,
there is obviously argument is wrong third. There's obviously a space for the idea that not every single piece of art you will make is going to ever have to change the world.
No.
Not every single piece of art you make has to be the definitive queer or black or whatever thing.
And it shouldn't be, because that's so much pressure to live under, to be like, and I think especially like we get torn apart for not making the most universal experience. And it's like, no, we shouldn't be making the most universal experience. Like, you have to allow space for art made by certain demographics to be bad. Like, it should be allowed to be bad in the same way that it allows people to have like the range. And also, you're always going to find your audience. Just because you personally don't like something doesn't mean it's not important to somebody else, or doesn't have like meaning. And like, I always like, there are certain like musical artists that like, I'm never going to get it. I just don't enjoy it. I think it's the blandest thing alive. And for some people that has like weathered them through their relationship, that has like been there for them in like moments when they needed it. It's been a way for connection. It's been a way to like meet other people who are interested in the same interests. So it's like, just because I don't personally like it doesn't mean it won't reach the audience that it needs to reach. And I think the joy of art being accessible in the way of like everyone can do it is that the more artists we have, the more like niche you're allowed to be, because there'll be somebody like reaching out for you as an audience member to be like, this is how I see things. Do you see things the same way?
Like, it's always that we live in a world now, and I'm not saying it didn't exist beforehand, but there's definitely an interesting thing in the world now. The more I think about it, the idea of there's so many pieces of media that fill that perfect. It's background noise. And it's weird because level of like, as someone who puts on a TV show just to listen to in the background, I do need some of those shows that are softer and lighter, etc. But I think part of that is level of, it's softer and lighter, but there's still heart put into it. There was still something of like, yes, it's not going to be the definitive black, queer, whatever piece, but a level of like, one isn't like, again, it's almost the rom-com vibe of things of like, this is fun. And you can just have 2 hours or whatever, like with a poem, a level of, this is a fun poem. It's 2 minutes, you're going to enjoy it, you're going to go home and you're done. You don't have to worry about it again. And there's something about having that too, which I think.
Yeah, you need the balance. It's when it's like so heartless that it's like, it's not even background noise. It's just like, there's nothing here. Like there's no foundation of anything interesting. And that's when I'm like, didn't need to be made. I think, yeah, you need to have that balance of things where people go to the cinema to just have a story that is gentle and fun and designed to make you feel good. And you need to go to have your heart ripped out. And that's the sort of, we need the balance of like, the more we have in terms of like, the more people able to create art because they have the space to do it, the more that like I can sit in my corner and just like be like, these are all the things I'm going to watch or engage with because they're interesting to me and I don't have to be in this corner, but like that corner can exist for somebody else who needs it. And yeah, I just, the democratization of art, everyone should be able to make stuff and like have the ability. And the more that it's like in the hands of people who like are passionate about it, the more creative and exciting projects you get. It's the like top level executives like sanding off the edges or like making sure that everything like fits a certain demographic quota because they had all these things that makes it like not worth engaging with. Not to say that the people who worked on it didn't put any effort in, but that like once your project is like so undistinguishable from your original creative intention, that can be when it's like, well, this it's not that you guys as actors or you guys as directors and like didn't put any effort in. It's just like there doesn't feel like there's anything here. Like I've not come away with like any resonance at all, and that's the bigger thing for me.
Well, on that note, we're going to end our Let's Talk About section there, and with all those wonderful tangents there, I now go into the completely randomness that is slow fire questions. Slow fire questions. I will be asking you some of the random questions I have here.
Yeah, somebody who's watched your YouTube channel, I am aware of.
There we go. That's the spiel. Got out of the way. But yes, we're going to give these questions a little bit more time that they deserve. Who knows? But yes, can you give me a random number in between 1 and 100, please?
45.
So then we are starting off with, do you think you're hot?
Oof. An interesting... This is such a interesting question to start off with. Yes, but with the caveat that it's not like a fully understanding that's not for everyone. Like I view it's so difficult because like I'm kind of known a little bit in the scene for having great outfits. Like fashion is something that is very forward focused with like how I present myself in those spaces because I love clothes and I love dressing well and I like doing my makeup and I really enjoy like exploring those different spaces and like what it can mean to present yourself and gender presentation and all that. But there's also that feeling of like my own connection with my body can be kind of like distant. So like I've kind of come to the realization recently that like my own name in my head is a blank space. And it's not that I don't answer to the name that was given to me or that I don't necessarily see myself as that person, but like my own internal like workings is like, I'm completely nameless. I'm also completely formless. Like there is nothing there that's like, it comes together depending on like what's influencing me at the time and what's coming together and like how I feel on a certain day. But like the idea of how I exist, there is no hotness. There is no concept of like a physical form. It's just like this version of me exists in the world. And like, there's also something that like, you can see yourself in the mirror and feel a disconnect. And it's not necessarily like a bad thing. It's not dysphoria in any way. It's just that like, sometimes I'll see myself in the mirror and I'm like, I thought I was a small animal that just existed. And now there's a thing in the mirror looking at me. And then there's times where I've like done the full face and I've put on the right, like the clothes for that evening. And I like have my photo taken and it looks amazing. And I'm just like so in my body. So like, I feel that there's kind of two, like I swing between the two of like thinking of myself as a completely formless, nameless thing. And then swing back to be like, I feel really good today. I'm fully present and in this space and I look amazing and like I think I just sort of swing between that balance, which is a long way of saying yes, but yeah, I think I do look hot sometimes, but also like there is no inherent value to that. Other people may disagree. That's fine. We're all human beings that feel different things. It's kind of like beauty standard. Oh.
Cool. Another number, please.
97.
Cool. Then we are going with favorite fictional character.
Oof, that's kind of hard because that's also something that's not very set. It depends on what I've been engaging with recently. So I go to Comic-Con. The last character I cosplayed was Harrow Harkonnen from the Locked Tomb series. So I love that character. And that, that was like, this is what I wanted to cosplay. That was something that was so like important to me to cosplay because I liked the book series so much and because my friend Sarah wanted to be Gideon with me. So there was like, that was really fun. And to do that was really interesting. But in the more recent times, I read this book called Between Two Fires, which ripped my heart out in the best way. And at the moment, that's like occupying my mind in terms of characters. So there's Thomas and Delphine and Mathieu, who are the three like main sort of characters of this novel. It is set in like medieval plague-ridden France, and a knight, a girl who has God inside her, and a priest are making this pilgrimage across plague-ridden France. It's so beautiful. It's written by Christopher Buehlman. It's like, I would highly recommend getting it. I enjoyed it so much. But like, I've like read it in 24 hours and I've just been like sitting with it ever since. Of like, it's so amazingly written. It is horror, so like if you're not a horror fan, I would not engage with it necessarily because it's like grim and gory, which I love, but I can understand why that's like not everyone's cup of tea. And it was this beautiful, like, not just the journey, but like the character dynamic of small girl and grumpy old man, and I like that character dynamic, and also having this priest who like coming along. It really resonated with me. I loved it so much. I'm like holding close to it, like it's close to my heart at the moment. I don't know what's gonna happen with it. It's just gonna like rotate in my brain like a rotisserie chicken for a while until I've like pulled apart everything about it that I like gotta chew on it some more because I like enjoyed it so much. So yeah, it's a difficult question to answer because like that's just what's occupying my mind at the moment.
Fair. Now number, please.
2.
2. Favorite film. All the subjective.
Yeah, all the subjective things. So favorite is difficult to quantify. The film I've probably seen the most, Ravenous from 1999, which is a cannibal horror film, which I really enjoy. It didn't do well when it first came out because it was really hard to market because like comedy horror western is not really a genre. But it's this interesting exploration of cannibalism through Manifest Destiny and the idea of the devouring of a nation and the devouring of a people of a nation as a way of like churning you through like imperialism and colonialism. And also has Guy Pearce being the saddest, like wettest man alive. Like he's playing a coward, but the cowardice that he has, he's got the biggest, saddest eyes, and you're like, his character arc of like, he just is doesn't want to be here, but also has like resigned himself to the situation that he's in. And it sort of sets up a very interesting narrative between him and the Robert Carlyle character, who's like a funky little guy, who is like one of the cannibal influences. So it's like these two, it operates in an interesting space because it leans into very like obvious cannibal narratives, but also like to avoid that getting stale, it leads into the vampire narrative as well with like blood and all these different things. So it has a lot for me to like engage with. And it's the film I've necessarily seen the most because like that's my comfort film, as wild as that is. And then I've spoken about Reanimator. I really like that. For those of you who want to check it out, please read the content warnings because there is scenes in it that are maybe not for everybody. And you can find a version online where they like cut one of those scenes or like edit it in such a way that it's not as triggering for some people. But it is interesting in that it's a true B movie. Like it's bonkers, but like me and my friend Vin have like constantly chat about like the gender stuff that's going on in there. We find that really interesting to like explore, and like Reanimator and Bride of Reanimator as two things are very interesting. And then, it's so hard. I do love the 2005 Pride and Prejudice. I'm a Matthew McFadden, Mr. Darcy.
They got range. They got range in their film likes.
Yeah, no, I mean it's true. Here's the thing. I love film as I love cinema as an art form. So if you've made a film beautifully and interestingly, I'm gonna want to engage with it. I've recently been going through lots of I have a list of things I'm trying to tick off in terms of I've gone through a lot of the old horror because I feel you can't talk about a subject if you don't know its history. And so going through what is foundational for horror in different ways. But I also love films where they're just about a set of characters or a situation. So they're set up in such a way that you're following certain things. And it's just this little indie film is oh, we're going to follow these people in a certain thing. And just, enjoying that kind of space to play in where it's kind of if a literary novel was a film as a type. But also if you made an independent film on a shoestring budget, and it's kind of its limitations are that you didn't have the budget to make a big action blockbuster, but you still made something with heart and an interesting story, I'll probably watch it because I need it as a cultural reset. I think there's something so valuable. So Shudder, the horror streaming service, has a lot of those films where they were made independently. They had a certain limitations of budget. Sometimes they're not the most in terms of in production value, the cleanest, but I have enjoyed them so much because I'm you made something really interesting, and you made it and got it done. So I'm I'm gonna engage with this because it's really cool. I really want people need to make films. Just you don't need a big studio, you just need to make it because you love it. And it's the same with poetry and writing and all these other things. It's just make art, just keep doing it. So I don't have a favorite film, but those are the ones that probably I've watched the most in terms of and what I've engaged with recently the most. Yeah.
I believe that means we've got 2 more questions because I think I know how to count. Sure.
Yes.
Best another number, please.
12.
12 then. Go-to karaoke song.
So me and my friends do karaoke in a very particular way in that we hire, we go to those karaoke places that are you're in a room together. You're not with other people. You are contained to your one room and everybody sings together. There are no individual solos. There are specific songs that maybe that are for certain people, but we're all screaming together in a room. So the ones it's not necessarily a go-to, but the song I do with my friends Sarah and Brooke is we do Downtown by Macklemore together.
And that's a good song. I like that song.
So that's technically my go-to karaoke song in that, but I only ever do it if Sarah or Brooke are also present. I'm not doing it alone. That is actually at Sarah's wedding. There are photos that are just of me and her, and they're the Downtown photos because they were all taken when we were singing Downtown. It was literally a little crowd of people, and then me and Sarah having the time of our lives, and everyone being we're glad they're having fun. We have no idea what's happening.
I don't know what it is about that song. There's something in the chorus. Every time he says boy in that chorus, I feel that energy.
It's a very upbeat song. It's a very it's dumb but in a fun way. It's literally about buying a moped and having a good time on your moped.
There's a lot of rightfully said things about Macklemore that he could be better at, and especially with his early career, his queer love song, etc. It's it's not bad, but also
he operates in a weird space where I think he has the best of intentions. He's also very recently come out as pro-Palestine, which is obviously the baseline. Yeah. It is the bare minimum, but it's you need it's. I'd rather he was than he wasn't kind of thing.
He's got two versions of his white privilege song, which again are for the most part pretty basic in terms of what he's talking about, but he is talking about it. He is doing that.
And I think those white privilege songs are useful for targeting the people who who would not engage with black rappers because of their prejudices against black rappers. So I think there is a value to be you're engaging with me, but I come from a long line of tradition and I don't exist without this tradition, and it is racist of you not to engage with it. like, and then be like, oh, but yours is fine, like, and to use that platform. It's the double-edged sword of like, these persons should use their platform in order to like speak about things and to get people to notice. But the fact that we have to have these spokespeople come forward who are the most palatable in order for people to care is like quite frustrating.
And, like, in that same way of like, I don't want to assume or say that Macklemore is the only rapper who is talking about fun stuff and anything like that. There's definitely so many others of so many different races, kinds, etc. But I do enjoy that Macklemore, who I think is a relatively talented rapper, will do fuck it, moped song.
Yeah. And it's a fun song. We have a great time when we sing it. I don't know the words, to be honest. Like, it's more vibes and then screaming downtown into each other's faces. But it's just about having fun. So that's technically my go-to in that, like, that's the one I'm doing most solo. But, like, we just like screaming in a room together. So there's always ABBA. Meatloaf will come up because that's the, like, Stevie Alexa song, and that's the like, everyone else go to the bathroom, this song is 6 minutes long, like, so you can get a new drink and like re-up while they do their thing. But then there's Britney Spears, there's Moana, there's like lots of different things going on, because it's just about screaming in that space together. It's never about like anybody having one specific moment. We're just there to have a good time.
Nice. And last number, please.
63.
So then we are ending with best thing you've done this week.
So this week, I hosted a book launch for Knights Errant Press. I hosted a book launch for their author, Briar Ripley Page, for The False Sister. That was my first time like hosting a book launch. I've done hosting of poetry nights, and we've done Q&A, as part of that. But this was my first time like sitting down with an author and like prepping questions in advance and basically having a conversation with them. And it was really lovely. It was a lovely intimate event down in Brighton. It went well. It was nice to like chat with this author. Like, Briar's really interesting and has like written some really interesting things that I've really enjoyed engaging with and reading. So it was nice to do that. And that was kind of also really like, oh my God, I got to like be the host of a book launch. Like, that's pretty cool. So yeah, really feeling myself about that. That I would say is probably the coolest thing I've done, like, or the thing I'm most proud of this week. But I also came here and I'm doing this, and I get to see my friend Tyrone, and I also hung out with Darren yesterday. So like, I've lived. I've seen my friends. I've like come and done stuff. Moving back to London has like re-upped my social life, so I feel very lucky to kind of be back in it and to be seeing people and to be going to poetry again and like hanging out with friends and like just experiencing like life again, like the things that make life interesting and wonderful. So yeah, like book launch, very cool. I'm very proud of myself for that.
Nice.
Brian said I was a good interviewer, so I'm like, I'm really like in it on that. I was like, thank you. That was like, I've done stuff before, but that was really cool that like I wrote questions that were interesting and that you enjoyed answering. Like, I think that like interviewing is a skill. So like, I
mean, writing and planning stuff in advance is not a thing we do on this podcast. I don't do that ever. There'll be no doing that. So I'm impressed that
it's improv.
Skill. Oh God,
it's free flowing jazz.
I'm not doing an improv. It technically is improv by just nature, but an improv podcast sounds awful and great in many ways.
Yeah. Do we have the skills? We've not done an improv class. We've done D&D together, which is improv to a certain extent.
Well, I mean, it's the whole thing of like, and we as a host, so much of it's having to improv and react to the night.
Yeah.
Like I am not an improv in the same way a Brennan Lee Mulligan, etc. is improv. I mean, a lot of people aren't in the same way, but like...
Yeah, shout out Brennan Lee Mulligan. Dimension 20 is one of the foundations of our friendship.
But like, I am not improv to that level. I'm going to do an improv comedy show, but improv, like, I have a fast enough wit.
Yeah.
I am smart and know words. This podcast may not prove that, but I am.
Yeah, I think, like... having both been hosts, but for like very different nights in terms of like the audience, like whenever I was on stage, like hosting or doing whatever, my whole thing is like, if we create queer community, you have to fucking talk to each other. Yeah. So this is about me being like,
talk to people.
Yeah, like flirting with the audience, but not in a way that feels like cringy and like ew. Flirting in a way that's like a bit saucy in that kind of like drag queen way, or that very like, or like like the Julian Clary way, where it's very like, this is a persona. I'm not really flirting with any of you. You're an amorphous mass, but like
this is the character I am playing.
Yeah, I'm making you laugh and I'm getting you ready to like enjoy the night, but also like mingle, like talk to each other. This is how we form connections. This is how you'll get to your next step in terms of whatever you're doing, because you'll meet somebody in this room that's like interested in doing a project or has a night themselves. Like talk to each other.
My vibe has always been, I want this to be an entertaining night. You guys do whatever you want to do on your own. Again, I'm giving you the space to do your own shit.
Yeah.
But a level of, if you've paid your money to be here, I want to entertain you in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
A lot of that, and like I've talked on this podcast about it before, but especially when I'm hosting with other people, partly by the nature of who those other people are, there is some level of, I'll let you do the crazy, over the top, off the chain stuff.
Yeah.
And I know I can do the entertainment by one, letting you do that, and then two, being the straight man to not undercut it, but to play off it.
To give the like, to do the comedy duo thing of like, yeah. Which would be interesting to see how we would host together. Because not that I'm necessarily the straight man, but I'm not nuts. So it's like a different vibe, which would be just interesting of what that flavor would be.
I mean, I'm saying the straight man. I'm also aware that, was it at the last time we hosted Process was with the Pete Beat Poet, and I feel like he was definitely more of the straight man that time, because I was in my Ken vibes and just chilling at the back and just having a...
Let me paint a word picture for this for the audience. As of the time of recording, the last Process was technically the Halloween special.
Yes.
And I came in like Beetlejuice colors, and Tyrone came as Ken from the live action Barbie movie, and like perfect vibes, like sunglasses, like full Mojo Dojo Casa House vibes. and then PJ was also that. PJ was hosting, but it was kind of like a very different space, and he was obviously like coming at it from like I'm here as a guest host, so I get to like play it down a little bit so that you can have the space. So slightly more straight man, but like also interestingly introducing me on stage, talking about my fashion, which was like a linking thing between the both of you. It's like, yeah, okay, this is the brand, unfortunately. But not unfortunately. I do like that people acknowledge that I dress well.
So compliment me before I got on stage.
Yeah, it was just like, oh, this long list of compliments. Whatever will I do with them? But it also sets up that audience to be like, what is about to happen? And it's like, it's me. Enjoy this. You're trapped in here with me.
Now that you said that, I will need one day where you go on stage and do a full-on Anastasia. It's me. Anastasia, the coat.
Grandmother, it's me, Anastasia.
Coat flap
if you hire me, if you get me to do a feature at Process, I promise to do that. I have a fur coat. I'll bring it. I'll do the whole thing. But that's only on the contingent that I have 15 minutes.
That Anastasia moment lives rent free in my head. It's a vibe.
I also actually, looping back to favourite film, I did watch that film a lot growing up. I quite like that. So that's my animated, select.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Tangents. This is let's end the podcast, because I should do that. So.
Or we could talk for 4 more hours.
I mean, we're going to talk for 4 more hours off the record, is the vibe. We can shit talk.
I have friends who definitely enjoy a 6-hour long YouTube video.
There'll be a day when I'll probably do a podcast where it's like, we're just going to talk shit about people and name names and all of that. But that's a day when I truly do not care anymore.
Yeah, this is our last ever podcast type deal. That's the burn all ties. That's the setting your status to something very specific and then turning your phone off.
I mean, I'm lovely. I'm nice. I would never do that.
Yeah, we'll be shady off screen. When you've been in the scene for as long as we have, you see some things.
Whilst we are on screen, you have your camera. If you want to be found online, let people know where to find you.
So yeah, I am on Instagram at urban_barbarian. I'm on Twitter at @whattheblair. I'm on Blue Sky at kblair.bluesky. I have a website, www.kblair.co.uk, which is just all of my work if you want to read things.
If you want to read things, full stop.
Full stop. Read the page and then you've done it. It's a poem in and of itself. No, it's not. I have stuff out in the world. My main things that you can buy a physical copy of. I'm in the Bad Betty's, like Bad Betty, Book of Bad Betty's anthology.
Okay, that one. Okay.
That one, it's such.
They've got a lot of anthologies.
It's a really long title to like make it make sense.
In my eye line, I can see Dizziness of Freedom. Dizziness of Freedom. That is what it's called. But like, I can see a lot of Bad Betty anthologies in my eye line. So it's like, which one is which? Because I can't.
There's a lot. They produce amazing work. Unthinkable, a Gothic anthology, is also something you can buy and have a physical book for. Like, I'm in a few interesting anthologies. How can I help you today, which is an anthology about fast food and the service industry, and I have a poem about coffee shops in there. So yeah, like, go to my website, all of the links are there. Jesus Loves You, God Hasn't Decided Yet is free, so there's really no excuse. Like, you don't even have to spend money. You can. There's like donation optional, but it is free in the world. So find me in those places. I will probably be at various poetry nights. I am friendly. You can come talk to me. So I'm out in the world.
Whilst we process, Linktree, and all the things we do, that will have the links to all the things. I don't know when this will come out, so there'll probably be a process coming out soon that'll be on sale by this stage. Who knows?
Come to Process. It is a really nice night. And I'm not just saying it just because I'm on the podcast and I'm your friend. You've cultivated a really lovely space. So come to Process. If it's the one poetry night you go to, come to Process.
Fair. Yes, find us on all...
Other poetry nights are available.
we shout them out a lot. I mean, there's an episode... Go back in our catalogue. Me and PJ spent 20 minutes talking about all the London poetry
I watched that episode.
That ever happened. It's a whole vibe. But yes, Twitter... Maybe I don't know why I said with Twitter, because we're not using Twitter.
Do you want me to give you a Blue Sky code? Because I have one.
I mean, I'm not going to use it. Instagram. Find us on Instagram. Find us on the Linktree. Find us on the podcast, which you're already doing now. So find us on Spotify and all the things. Blah, blah, blah. Words. Tagging. If you've made it this far, good for you. Good for you. But we're going to end now. Like, I'm tempted to literally just cut it here and be done.